Hello, my name is Taya Graham, and welcome to the Police Accountability Report. Remember, this show has a single purpose, holding the politically powerful institution of policing accountable. And we achieve this goal not simply by just showing videos of bad cops, but probing the underlying system which makes bad policing possible. Well, what does that mean? Well, perhaps the breaking news we will report on today will help explain this by example. But before I get started, I want you to know that if you have evidence of police misconduct, you can contact me directly at Taya's Baltimore on Facebook and Twitter. And please like, share, and comment on our videos. You know I read your comments and appreciate them. Okay, so today we're sharing a story about a 64-year-old man named Randal Thompson from Denton, Texas, who's been fighting for his freedom for almost 2 years. But it's how he ended up in the grasp of law enforcement that is illustrative of our emphasis on systemic problems with law enforcement. His story begins in Dallas, where he went to a police auction to purchase a car for his son. It's worth noting that police auctions are part of the system we will be examining today. That's because, generally speaking, auctions are one of the places where law enforcement and profit most explicitly intersect. I'm sure most of us are aware of how expansive civil asset forfeiture has become in the US. According to a database assembled by the Washington Post, law enforcement agencies across the country seized roughly $2 billion worth of property, much of it from people who haven't even been convicted of a crime. It's a perfect alignment between criminal justice and profit that raises deep questions about the credibility of the system itself. But I digress. As I was recounting, Thompson attended a police auction to buy a car. He purchased two, and I will let him tell the story of what happened next.
I had been going to these police auctions down through the years and just picking up cars for to donate to families that needed a car, that didn't have a car. And it was a plumber's truck. It was real beat up. It had a lot of tools in it. We didn't know if we got the cars until the next day, and then you have a few days to get them out. And then there's a storage facility across the street from the Dallas Police Impound where you can store the vehicles.
So shortly after purchasing the car, Randal noticed something odd. There were some leftover items, namely drugs, sitting in the front seat, which he disposed of.
At that point, we were digging through the truck, and we found, paraphernalia laying in the seat, some digital scales and torn open baggies and broken crack pipes. So we realized it was possibly a drug seized vehicle. So we went to extremely thorough cleaning to clean this truck out before we even attempted to try to bring it home.
Finally, he began the drive home. Everything was going smoothly until he encountered police in a small town called Crossroads. Here he is again with how and why he was stopped.
There's extremely high levels of police contact, 5 or 10 police cars, working the highway. And we came through this one town called Crossroads, Texas. And they had like 5 police cars pulled 5 people on the side of the road. They were flashing lights. And we had to drive through there 5 miles per hour just to get through there safely. And I had noticed someone come in behind me, and then he got over beside me. And at that point, in Texas, you have to give a leeway of at least one lane if a policeman has a car pulled over. You have to slow down and give them an easement of one lane. Well, this guy beside me wouldn't let me over. I had no idea it was a policeman. And he was keeping me from getting over into the lane to give an easement for the 5 police cars that had 5 victims on the side of the highway pulled over. So I just slowed down to a stop and let him go on by and was able to give the lane access. Well, then this guy come right in behind me, turned on his lights, and next thing you know, I'm pulled over. He wanted to look through the truck, and he got me out of the vehicle. He said that it looks like the truck has been stolen. I had all my receipts from buying it from the Dallas Police Impound just a couple of weeks before. And by this time, I got 5 policemen around me, and they're all got their hands on their guns, and they're like, well, we got you now. We got you. This sort of trickery that they use to try to get you to confess to something. And like him saying the truck was stolen. The truck is not stolen. I have the receipts right here. But he asked me, can I search your vehicle? And as a gullible person that trusts the police, I said, well, sure, there's nothing in there. Go ahead. Well, he searched the vehicle, didn't find anything. I mean, I had a briefcase. He had that thing ripped all apart. Okay, now during this hour and a half to 2 hour traffic stop, he searches my vehicle 3 more times. He doesn't find anything. At the point where I'm like, are we being detained? My son is following me. He's over there across the street. His pregnant girlfriend is about to, she said, I need a pickle. So he said, well, Mr. Thompson, I'd like to look through your vehicle one more time. And we're going to let you go. Okay, that's great. Go ahead. So the 4th search, he reaches into my truck and he runs out of there and he grabs my phone and throws it on the ground and he swings me around and he's arresting me. And he's got the gear shifter knob off of the truck in his hands. My son told me, he said, it looked like he pulled something out of his pocket and threw down there. Now, how do you prove that? We trust the police. How do you prove that he planted, he wanted me in jail so badly that he planted this drugs in my truck? But in the police report, and I think I've sent you a copy, he was able to take that gear shifter knob apart and it had a stash in there. And they won't tell me what they found.
But bear in mind, Thompson had the receipt from the auction in hand, which we're showing you right now. And despite the fact that he had waited several weeks to claim the car while processing the paperwork, the vehicle had been in police custody the entire time with the drugs in it, according to this paperwork.
That this policeman, in his mindset, he had every intention of to justify his job in this small town in Denton County, to justify those 30 or 40 policemen that they have on their police force. They have to keep the jails full. They have to find victims. They have to get someone frustrated. And then they say, no, I'm not going to do that. And then they arrest you for no reason.
Still, Randal found himself in jail. And this is where his story and the aforementioned theme of the monetization of law enforcement meet. Because as the facts seem to suggest, Randal's legal problems have all led to one overarching theme. Besides having to make bail and losing time from work, Randal also had to hire a lawyer, an attorney to whom he paid $2,000, but who recently decided to no longer represent Randal and drop the case.
And I'm hoping that I'm not going too far with this, but it's just so disturbing for me. This was almost 2 years ago. I'm tethered to the courts. I have a book signing that I'm supposed to be doing right now on a nationwide book signing for Barnes & Noble, and I can't leave the county.
Since then, he's received letters from lawyers offering to represent him for, wait for it, $10,000. Meanwhile, the car he bought was confiscated by police. And while we're talking about what this single encounter with law enforcement is costing Thompson, let's put his so-called crime into perspective. The apparent crime against the community that has now engulfed his life, cost him court time, and even enlisted a grand jury to indict him. It's something I want to focus on that is often overlooked: the disconnect between the consequences of enforcing the law versus the pain it inflicts on the people charged with breaking it. Who exactly is the victim here? How is public safety being served? And how does the community benefit from this protracted legal process based upon a single car stop? Unfortunately, this is not his first encounter with the law. As Mr. Thompson told us in his interview, he spent 5 years in jail after refusing to plead guilty to charges of possession of unlawful weapons. The experience prompted him to write this book, Meth, Heroin, and Death, in which he discusses how he was unfairly treated by a criminal justice system more interested in monetizing criminality instead of promoting public safety or rehabilitation. But the point that is more important is that he finds himself entangled again in the same system, a story that we have encountered all too often on this show. Law enforcement where it appears no laws are needed, a punishment that seems priced to inflict physical pain and not mediate justice. To understand how all these moving parts work, or don't, together, I'm joined by my reporting partner, Stephen Janis. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me.
Tay, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Stephen, you've been reviewing the paperwork. What have you discovered?
Well, Tay, I've reviewed the paperwork, and he does have a receipt for purchasing this car at auction. So he had purchased a car at auction and taken possession of it shortly after that, and he was arrested, pretty much directly after he took possession of the car. So the paperwork backs up his story and raises question as to why this arrest occurred at all.
Has there been any comment from either the prosecutor or police?
We did speak to the Denton County Prosecutor's Office. We gave them the charging information. They declined to comment. They did confirm that they're going forward with prosecuting this case. So certainly Mr. Thompson faces some serious charges in court. Really, it's just one charge of felony possession, but it's still a felony, which is extremely serious. But the prosecutor would not make a comment on the case or why they're continuing to prosecute it, because I asked them, why are you prosecuting this case given the evidence? And they would not comment.
How much do you think this type of arrest is tied to the concept we've talked about before on this show, hegemonic policing?
I mean, I really do think this is a perfect example of hegemonic policing. I mean, a guy buys a car at an auction and they arrest him for something in a gear shaft. It really is something where police are just projecting power or trying to monetize the criminal justice system. As we can see from what Mr. Thompson has told us, he's got lawyers trying to charge him. He's facing $987 in court costs alone. So it's really just monetization, which is really an expression of hegemonic policing. The two go hand in hand, and this is a perfect case of it.
Of course, whenever we report on law enforcement in Texas, we always like to turn to our resident expert there, Otto the watchdog, for context. Otto has been fighting his own protracted battle with police after he was arrested for holding a series of signs that some motorists found offensive. His arrest shown here has led to a long series of court appearances and continued pressure from prosecutors, which has taken a toll on him and his family as well. Otto, thank you so much for joining us. First, I just want to get your impressions of Randal's case. What do you think?
The stories are all the same. Right. The facts might change a little bit, but it's still the same. People feel like they were falsely accused. They suffer all the punishment before they go to trial. It takes a long ass time to get to trial. And then by the time they're done with trial, the damage has already been done.
He described basically a wall of police. How common are these types of traffic dragnets in Texas, especially in the suburbs and rural areas?
That's pretty common. They often do traffic. I don't know if they call them stings or ambushes or what they call them, but they often set up and have multiple units running traffic in the same location. So that's pretty common.
Now, he implied that at the heart of this case is the idea of monetizing law enforcement. Now, you had talked with Stephen about how you wished you could start a business that forced customers to buy from you. How much is monetization influencing these types of car stops?
So when you get arrested, there's tons of fees. I don't know what happened to his car, but oftentimes your car goes right back to the impound. Presumably he just bought it, right? So you buy a car from the impound. You're driving away, the police pull you over. Even if you were breaking the law, you get pulled over and you just bought this car, and then they search it and find drugs, and now you have to fight all that, right? Most people are not going to fight it because they either don't know how or can't afford it. To hire an attorney for a misdemeanor case like this is usually double or three times what the cost of the ticket would have been. So if you pay $750 for an attorney on a $200 ticket, it's not very financially sound. They know this. Most people can't afford it, so they just let it happen. And this guy, this isn't an unusual thing. So when people get pulled over and lose their car, they can't get to work. It's not just the fees associated with court. It's the real life impact that happens right now. And it's not supposed to be that way. You're supposed to be proven guilty before you get punished.
Otto, do you have an update on your case, on your arrest for holding a sign on a public street corner?
There is no update. We're just with COVID, everything's being slowed down apparently, but it's really weird because some courts are moving forward. I don't understand how if COVID is shutting things down and everybody's working from home, we should still be able to get something done. Right. But cases are backing up across the country. And I think that eventually they're going to have to start letting people go on this shit, or we're going to be, waiting 5 years for traffic court, unless you plead guilty, of course.
Now, as we've discussed before on this show, any conversation on why and how we police is confronted with rhetoric that is unique to the institution itself. That is what we like to call the for us or against us coalition that, as we pointed out last week, has completely mischaracterized the movement to question police funding into an all or nothing proposition. But I think the case of Randal Thompson warrants us to take a closer look at how the process, which is currently affecting a single individual, is actually part of a broader growth of the type of policing that leads to questionable cases like this. As Stephen discussed, we call this hegemonic policing, the idea that law enforcement dedicates an increasingly greater share of resources to demonstrate its power rather than improving public safety. That instead of solving burglaries or homicides, police make random car stops to find more customers for their ever-growing business of criminal engagement. Of course, the war on drugs and its dependence on so-called proximity crimes, as Stephen mentioned, is perfectly suited for this type of law enforcement. As Randal pointed out, despite having a receipt from a police auction and a fairly plausible explanation of how the drugs had nothing to do with him, intent and circumstance didn't matter. The so-called "these aren't my drugs" line that is often treated with derision by police could certainly apply here. But of course, imagine the power and the ability to imbue the possession of an object with the full spectrum of criminal intent. Imagine the sense of agency that comes with deeming a person in proximity to a chemical or plant, and how that becomes an excuse to subject them to imprisonment, fines, legal fees, bail, and condemnation. And imagine if these simple designations and the ensuing legal process could be used to fund and justify your pension, employment perks, generous overtime, and even hero worship from an overeager mainstream media. I wonder what a future observer, a person removed by hundreds of years from the so-called justice system, would think of this process of an entire governmental agency that predicates a huge part of its work on denying freedom, confiscating property, and ensuring that the so-called suspect would be excluded from civic participation for the rest of their natural lives. All based on a plant or chemical and the need or desire to alter the mind. A process so objectively destructive, one has to ask the question, who is really committing a crime? Mr. Thompson or the system which refuses to leave him be? I would like to thank my guest, Mr. Randal Thompson, for taking the time to speak with us today. Thank you. And I would also like to thank Otto the Watchdog, who brought this case to our attention. Thank you, Otto.
Hey, thanks, guys. I'll see you next time.
And of course, I have to thank intrepid journalist Stephen Janis for his writing, research, and editing on this piece. Thank you, Stephen.
Tay, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And of course, I have to thank friend of the show, Noli D. Thanks, Noli. And I want you watching to know that if you have evidence of police misconduct or brutality, please share it with us and we might be able to investigate. Please reach out to us. You can email us tips privately at par@therealnews.com and share your evidence of police misconduct. You can also message us at Police Accountability Report on Facebook or Instagram, or at Eyes on Police on Twitter. And of course, you can message me directly at Teas Baltimore on Twitter or Facebook. And please like and comment and share. I do read your comments and appreciate them, and they really do help. My name is Taya Graham, and I am your host of the Police Accountability Report. Please be safe out there.